Chief White House correspondent John Roberts now from the North Lawn with new details on this, John.
Harris, yeah, we'll get to the details about George Papadopoulos in just a second. But first of all, to that phone call that you mentioned at the beginning of the program, between President Trump and Vladimir Putin, they did talk on the phone for more than an hour. It was the first time, I'm told by officials in a very long time, that the two have spoken to each other. They talked at length about Venezuela, the need for a peaceful transition there, and the importance of immediately getting food, water, and medicine to people there who are starving and sick. Listen to what Sarah Sanders said about it just a short time ago.
The president's primary focus throughout the call was about helping the people of Venezuela, making clear that the United States stands with the people of Venezuela, and the importance of making sure those individuals are able to get the food and the water and the medical supplies needed.
The two leaders also talked about the possibility of extending existing nuclear agreements and perhaps even cutting a new deal that would include the United States, Russia, and possibly China. That might go to intermediate-range nuclear missiles. They also talked about North Korea, Ukraine, and trade. The president, as you mentioned, also briefly talked about the Mueller report, mostly from the standpoint that it's over with and it's time to get on to business. Now, in terms of that George Papadopoulos story, President Trump has insisted for almost a couple of years now that his campaign was being spied on in terms of the Russia investigation, and this would seem to add a lot of credence to those claims. Papadopoulos had been talking to a Cambridge, and this is Cambridge in the UK, professor who had sent ostensibly an assistant to go meet with Papadopoulos. Her name was Azra Turk. She claimed to be an assistant to this Cambridge professor. Papadopoulos met with her at a bar in London after she invited him to come out. Papadopoulos told Tucker Carlson last night that he immediately became suspicious of her.
She was very suggestive, as you can understand. Younger, very flirtatious, and I right away understood that this wasn't a Cambridge assistant. And, she barely spoke English. She was very flirty and was trying to do two things. One, to extract information about my professional connections in the Middle East, and two, to see if I had any information that she could potentially extract for me about Trump in Russia, which of course is nonsense.
Now, we may find out more details about this and other events when the Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz releases his report about the genesis of the Russia investigation. The president also telling our Catherine Herridge yesterday that he plans to declassify the documents related to the FISA warrants in the Russia investigation. Listen here.
Yes, I'm going to be allowing declassification pretty soon. I didn't want to do it originally because I wanted to wait, because I know what they, I've seen the way they play. They play very dirty. So I decided to do it, and I'm going to be doing it very soon, far more than you would have even thought.
However, the president did not say when soon is, but this whole report, Harris, would seem to reinforce the notion that the federal government was using clandestine procedures to investigate the Trump campaign, which would give a lot of credence to what the president was saying about the potential for spying, and also what the attorney general said up on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
yes?
I wrote down that word spying as you were speaking it, because I think that's what a lot of people might be thinking today. John Roberts, thank you very much.
The president's top military, intelligence, and national security officials met today to talk about Venezuela. Afterward, correspondent Jillian Turner spoke with National Security Advisor John Bolton. Jillian, after a disappointing week, has Bolton's outlook changed on regime change in Venezuela?
Well, Chris, despite the fact that events on the ground didn't go Juan Guaido's way this week, his planned military takeover fizzled out before it even began. The National Security Advisor sounds pretty sanguine.
Well, I'd put it this way. I think they ran a play. They didn't gain any yards. They got up. They dusted themselves off. The game lasts 60 minutes.
Bolton joined the Secretary of Defense this morning at the Pentagon to strategize about U.S. next steps, and seems to confirm that President Trump has asked for military blueprints.
One of my functions is to make sure that when he asks for options, they're ready to go. And that's true across the board on the whole range of ways we can affect the situation in Venezuela, and a meeting in the tank is one of them.
4 senior Venezuelan government officials had pledged to defect and join Guaido this week, but then failed to do so. Any chance that everything that transpired this week was a setup by the Maduro regime?
They're not that smart. I do think it demonstrates the importance of the Cuban presence in Venezuela. I think if the Cuban presence disappeared by waving a magic wand right now, Maduro would be out by midnight.
Sources say Bolton may be overshooting on that one, Chris.
Jillian, the president's team is beginning to give some hints about its closely guarded Mideast peace plan. What are you learning?
Well, last night the president's point man on this, his son-in-law Jared Kushner, hinted for the first time at the actual substance of that plan and dropped a bombshell.
If you say two-state, it means one thing to the Israelis, it means one thing to the Palestinians. So we said, let's just not say it.
Mideast experts obviously take issue with this. A two-state solution has been a Palestinian precondition for negotiations for decades, but Bolton doesn't seem fazed.
I think one of the real significant features of this plan when it's fully rolled out will be that it doesn't necessarily conform to the terms and concepts of prior efforts.
Bolton and Kushner are both convinced they're the right people, and now's the right time to resurrect Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And according to Fox News sources, their plan's getting rolled out in just a few weeks in June. Chris?
Jillian, thank you.
The president now wrapping up talks with the Slovak Prime Minister there, Peter Pellegrini, now taking questions from reporters. Let's listen in.
Over an hour, and we talked about many things. Venezuela was one of the topics. And he is not looking at all to get involved in Venezuela other than he'd like to see something positive happen for Venezuela. And I feel the same way. We want to get some humanitarian aid. Right now people are starving. They have no water. They have no food. This is, Mr. Prime Minister, one of the richest countries in the world 20 years ago, and now they don't have food and they don't have water for their people. So we want to help on a humanitarian basis, and I thought it was a very positive conversation I had with President Putin on Venezuela.
Did you address the election meddling issues?
Did you tell him not to meddle in the U.S. election? Are you talking about extending the New START treaty or adding China to it, or what exactly?
We're talking about a nuclear agreement where we make less and they make less, and maybe even where we get rid of some of the tremendous firepower that we have right now. We're spending billions of dollars on nuclear weapons, numbers like we've never spent before. We need that, and they are also, and China is frankly also. We discussed the possibility of a three-way deal instead of a two-way deal. And China, I've already spoken to them. They very much would like to be a part of that deal. In fact, during the trade talks, we started talking about that. They were excited about that, maybe even more excited than about trade. But they felt very strongly about it. So I think we're going to probably start up something very shortly between Russia and ourselves, maybe to start off. And I think China will be added down the road. We'll be talking about non-proliferation. We'll be talking about a nuclear deal of some kind, and I think it'll be a very comprehensive one.
Mr. President, did you address the election meddling issues that came up in the Mueller report with Mr. Putin today?
We discussed it. He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse, but he knew that because he knew there was no collusion whatsoever. Pretty much that's what it was.
Did you tell him not to meddle, Mr. President? Did you tell him not to meddle in the next election?
Excuse me, I'm answering this question. You are very rude. So we had a good conversation about many different things, okay?
Did you ask him not to meddle in the next election?
We didn't discuss that. Really, we didn't discuss it. We discussed 5 or 6 things. We also we went into great detail on various things, especially, I would say, the nuclear, especially maybe Venezuela. We talked about North Korea at great length, and pretty much that's it. We also discussed trade. We intend to do a lot of trade with Russia. We do some right now. It's up a little bit, but he'd like to do trade, and we'd like to do trade. And getting along with Russia and China, getting along with all of them is a very good thing. Not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Getting along with other countries, including your country, by the way. But getting along with countries is a good thing. And we want to have good relationships with every country.
Mr. President, should Mueller testify? Would you like to see him testify?
I don't know. That's up to our Attorney General, who I think has done a fantastic job.
And why shouldn't Congress
Yeah, go ahead.
have the same right to hear
Yes, please. Well, I'd like to. I know people from Slovakia, and they're incredible people. I would love to. It's a beautiful country, and it's doing very well. It's doing very well. Yeah. Yeah, please. Well, the tariffs have been a necessary thing for me to do because in the case of the European Union, they have not treated us right. We're losing $181 billion a year. We have been for many years. And the European Union has not treated us properly. But we'll see what happens with regard to tariffs on cars with the European Union. We haven't made a decision on that.
Mr. President, are you going to nominate the Defense Secretary, Shanahan? Are you going to make it official?
It'll be discussed next week.
Mr. President, World Press Freedom Day. Can you say anything? We've heard a lot about your grievances to us.
Say it again. Say it again.
World Press Freedom Day. We've heard a lot about your grievances about us. But can you say something that you can improve to improve communication and relationship with the press?
Well, I think I have a very good relationship with some of the press, and unfortunately some of the press doesn't cover me accurately. In fact, they go out of their way to cover me inaccurately, so I don't think that's a free press. I think that's a dishonest press, and I want to see a free press. I mean, today I was happy to see on the front page of the New York Times for the first time where they were talking about spying, and they were talking about spying on my campaign. That's a big difference between the way they've been covering, but that's a big story. That's a story bigger than Watergate as far as I'm concerned. So I want to see freedom of the press, and I get treated fairly by some press, but I get treated very unfairly by other press, and frankly, I think that's very dishonest, and I don't consider that. When you have stories that are purposely written badly, in many cases, very much on purpose, I mean, you look at it, that's not free press. That's the opposite of free press.
Mr. President, have you decided whether you'll invoke executive privilege as it relates to Don McGahn?
That'll all be determined over the next week or so.
But you said it was done.
But, you know, I will say this. There's been no president in history that has given what I've given in terms of looking at just a total witch hunt. I call it the Russian hoax. It turned out to be no collusion, no obstruction. It was a total hoax. And yet I was transparent. We gave 1.4 million documents. We gave hundreds of people. I let him interview the lawyer, the White House lawyer, for 30 hours. Think of that, 30 hours. I let him interview other people. I didn't have to let him interview anybody. I didn't have to give any documents. I was totally transparent because I knew I did nothing wrong. It turned out I did nothing wrong. No collusion with Russia. Think of it. $35 million they wasted over a period of 2 years. No collusion, no obstruction. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'll be running on the economy.
Thank you.